So in the last video, we talked about how we convert from a time domain representation to a frequency domain representation. And what I want to talk about briefly in this video is what you can do once you've done that. There's a lot of things that you can do, a lot of really cool effects, morphing sounds together and combining them in different ways, doing all kinds of processing once you have this frequency representation. But what I want to talk about here is one of the simplest but also one of the most important things that you can do, which is to change the pitch and speed of sound. So we're going to talk about briefly what happens when you do this in the time domain, the waveform, and then we're going to talk about what happens when you do it in the frequency domain. Imagine I have this sine wave at 440 hertz, and I want to play it back twice as fast. I want to double the playback speed of it. It's pretty obvious how I would do that. I can simply say, well, I'm going to play every other sample, and that's going to play it back twice as fast. And instead of playing every dot here, I'm just going to do that one, and 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 on and on. I'm going to skip over all the alternate ones. That would play it back twice as fast. But it's also going to mean every peak and every trough is going to come twice as fast. Every cycle is going to happen twice as fast. And so the frequency of that sine wave is going to double. So the time domain, when I do this, playback speed and frequency are tied to each other. They're linked to each other. And I want to show you exactly what I mean here. If I take this recording here, this piano sound, and I just change my playback speed, it's playing back twice as fast, but the pitch also went up. It's double what it was before. And so those are linked to each other. And that's what happens when I do this in the time domain. One easy way to control these independently, which is something that we often want to do, is to do this in the frequency domain instead. So I simply do frequency domain analysis, like we talked about in the last video, the windowing, periodization, and the fast Fourier transform. And then I manipulate my data in the frequency domain to change either the speed of it or the frequency content of it independently. And then I transform it back into the time domain. So I want to show you exactly what I mean by this. So let me show you what I mean here. Here we have a frequency representation of that same piano sound. And so I have different controls here. You can see I have a separate one for speed and a separate one for pitch, so I can control these independently. So if I want it to play back faster, I can just move the speed slider. And you hear that the pitch of the sound doesn't change. And if I want to change the pitch without changing the speed, I can similarly just move the pitch slider. And you hear that the speed does not change when I change the pitch. So these things are being controlled independently because of the power I have from the representation of this sound in the frequency domain. So the final thing that I want to do here is just do a brief recap of all the things that we've covered in Module 1 of the course as we've been exploring these fundamentals of music technology. So we've covered a lot of material here. We talked about waveforms and their various properties, most notably the amplitude, frequency, and phase. We talked about psychoacoustics. Now, psychoacoustics is a little bit different from just simple waveform representation of sound, how we can talk about things like loudness and pitch and how those are different from amplitude and frequency. And also how they're phenomena like the Fletcher-Munson loudness curves, where what we hear doesn't always match what we might see in a waveform view. We talked about timbre and its components, spectra and envelope, as representing things that cannot be described simply by loudness and pitch. And we talked about the visual representations of sound besides waveforms, looking at their spectra and looking at their sonograms. We talked about all the different considerations when we're representing sound digitally, how to think about the sampling rate, the bit width, spatialization, and how to represent all of these in various lossless and lossy file formats. And then finally, we talked about frequency domain analysis, how to go from that waveform view into a sonogram type view of sound, and how we can take advantage of that transformation, which we've done it, to manipulate sound in some different ways, such as changing the pitch and speed independently.